This is Fred Johannes, and I'm CEO of Nitro, and I'm here with Michael Bunyard, who's an industry expert on endpoint management and has a huge background with, major ISVs, startups, that run the gambit from, endpoint management to network management and beyond. So he has some great, background there. And you recently wrote a blog that really caught my eye, Why Monitor Application Performance If You Don't Fix It, right? And in that blog, you talk about that, it's really pretty hilarious, a LifeLock commercial where there's a bank robbery going on. And then the security dude says, I'm not a security guard, I'm a security monitor. I thought,
right.
And that kind of, go ahead. Yeah.
I love marketing is good when it builds the brand, which it does, because you understand what LifeLock's all about. Yep. And you remember the commercial, and you understand what differentiates the solution, right? So I thought those series of advertisements were great. If you think about Super Bowl commercials, the Clydesdale Budweiser commercials, they accomplish the brand. You understand the brand is Budweiser, it's all American, and they have the horses. Doesn't really distinguish what's different about Budweiser, but at least you get the brand recognition. But I think the LifeLock commercials do a great job of accomplishing everything you want in a series of commercials. Of course, being a tech guy, I had to start thinking about how that relates to our world.
No, exactly. And I thought it really is a thing that at Nitro, we kind of like, I won't say contend with, but we do in a sense, because we're a doer. We're not really a monitor, right? And there's lots of monitors, as you know. Why don't you give us a little idea of your background, because you've been in every possible monitoring, I think, technology out there. So give us a little.
So not to date myself too much, but started out in the 80s and 90s at companies like Boole and Babbage and BMC, and the endpoint itself started out as a 3270 terminal for mainframes, and then evolved to exotic things like, OS X, and then finally Windows when we got into distributed systems. And my companies were in charge of doing performance monitoring in the beginning, which we would report on issues within the applications and the end users were experiencing. And then we evolved those to giving the customers tools to fix the problem so that they could solve the performance issues. And then finally to automating, letting them automatically solve the problem through a set of predefined rules. So that was a natural evolution that had to occur even way back in the 80s and 90s in terms of fixing the problem, not just telling them they have a problem.
Yeah. And so where do you see that going today? Because it almost seems like it's almost like a step back, because you see a lot of proliferation of monitoring, but less on the automation side. So I'm kind of wondering if you have some thoughts on what's happening now and where that's going.
Yeah, it's, I think one of the most overused words that ISVs will use is visibility. Visibility, you go to any website, it's like visibility into your application performance issues. Well, I think the end users already know they have problems. They don't really need the visibility. Maybe other people in the organization need visibility, but I think at the end of the day, what the end user really wants is for things to run better.
Yeah.
And so I think I kind of run away from the visibility word. Visibility will give you a little more insight into how you can fix it, but then you have to figure out how you're going to fix it. And that brings in a whole plethora of choices, really.
Yeah. And so where do you kind of see the holes in the current approach or the problems, relative to endpoint management?
Yes. So what I've seen is the biggest issue is solutions many times are very difficult to deploy. So the endpoint agent may require a reboot of the system. It may actually hook the operating system kernel, which is even more intrusive, causing that application to potentially break other things. So you've got some complicated rollouts, difficult to get the end user to implement this solution easily. And then there's also an issue where if it's a product that is, let's say, working on security for the endpoint, it may not exactly allow the end user to have the ultimate end user experience. So the last few years I've been working a lot in security, and I've seen that kind of dichotomy between what the security operations people want and what the operations teams want that manage the endpoint.
Yeah.
It's two different things.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how does that get resolved? Because that's not just a technology issue, right? It's kind of an organizational issue.
Yeah, and it even goes into the network, right? So, ultimately it's the operations team that are in charge of making sure the endpoints are running smoothly. Sometimes when they have problems, they'll toss the ball over to the network folks and say, can you fix the problem? Give me more bandwidth, whatever you do. The network guys don't have the insight into what's going on the endpoint because they don't ever touch those. And then the security team, if they're involved in a solution, they oftentimes want to kind of force the ops team to deploy a solution that's yet another agent, yet another thing that hooks the kernel, yet another thing that's going to be hard to deploy and test and roll out. And so you've got, some contention between these teams. And I think if you're going to be successful providing either a security or a performance solution, you need to have a way of appealing to all these contingents within the organization to make their lives easier and better and have less resistance to rolling it out.
Yeah. And then I think in the end, it's all about the end users, right? Are you actually making their lives better, more productive, all that kind of stuff? Right?
Yeah. I mean, I see the endpoint, interestingly, as the center of the universe. Okay. So from an end user experience perspective, it's all about what happens at the endpoint. It's not about the cloud. It's not about the network. It's not about servers. It's not about anything else. It's about what happens at the endpoint. And oftentimes it's not just one application that's performing poorly at the endpoint, it's multiple applications. So the center of the universe is the end user. And then also from a security perspective, what I really found was that the people in the organization are the weak link in the chain. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones that click on the wrong link or visit the bad website or go for a phishing or drive-by attack. And so the endpoint is that entry for the bad guys to get into the organization. So that's why from security and both end user experience, it's all about the endpoint.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, how do you think that Nitro Accelerator fits in? You mentioned us in the blog and, where do you kind of see us kind of fitting in?
Well, I think you have a great solution because, for one, you meet my requirement of being super easy to deploy. Mm-hmm. You also meet my requirement of an organization doesn't have to spend a ton of money and implement a wide-ranging solution and throw armies of services people at the solution in order to gain benefit. You offer a free trial. You can download the product. An individual can start with a small portion of the network. And what I love about it is they can specify which endpoints need fixing, and everything running on those endpoints runs better. Mm-hmm. If you look at the alternative approaches like application performance monitoring, for example, APM is a space where it's kind of evolved from just visibility to enhancing specific applications to let them run better. But then again, it takes time to set that up. You have to hook into certain apps, and it doesn't make everything running on the endpoint run better. So I think you've got a very unique approach and one that people should look at. I mean, unfortunately, most organizations just throw bandwidth at the problem. Mm-hmm. So the network guys will allocate more bandwidth and hope that the problem goes away, and that's just expensive and not smart.
Yeah. And it doesn't follow the users wherever they are in our kind of more mobile world, right?
So, exactly.
Where do you think this is going? What if you're kind of looking at the future and, we're a player in there, where do you think the future will be in terms of, requirements? What would you recommend, for a company like ours, looking at that future?
So you're doing a great job of so far bridging the gap between, the network and the endpoint. Your solution solves a problem for the end user, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. And, I think that there's some potential for you to add value from a security perspective. You're obviously very secure aware by doing the encryption that you do. Yeah. But if you could come out with some capabilities that help the end user have better security and performance, you've got that win-win. You've got both sides of the house happy. The operations guys will be happy to deploy you. The security guys will probably have the budget to help support deployment because all the budget's going to the security guys. Yeah. So that's where I would kind of encourage you to evolve the product strategy.
No, that's great. And then you take out that weak link in the chain because at the end of the day, it probably should be transparent to that end user, you know, how to implement security. You don't want to have to rely on them and education programs, you know, to be effective. Oh, yeah. You can solve that with technology. It just makes it more assured, right? So
exactly. Yeah.
So, you know, I always like to get something personal. I know that you've traveled, you know, all over the world. You know, in your career, you've been to some pretty exotic places. So I was wondering if you could relate, you know, kind of an interesting exotic place where you had kind of this unique business experience, you know.
Sure. So, yeah, I've been lucky in that a lot of our sales have been internationally driven. So I've gotten to go to Japan and China and South America and Europe many times. And I think probably one of my favorite trips ever was when I went to New Zealand. So I was lucky enough to have a fraud management group that was in New Zealand, of all places. And so flew into the Northern Island and had our user group and got input and requirements, which was awesome. And then I had a former coworker that lived on the South Island in a town called Dunedin. It's a port town on the South Island. And so I was able to go down and spend 3 or 4 days with him and his family. And it was really cool. I mean, that South Island is beautiful. It's where a lot of the Hobbit films and other things have been filmed. So it's just wonderful in its beauty. But also, I got kind of like the personal tour guide there since he knew the island so well. So it took me to places like Penguin Preserve for the emperor penguins, which are the real large penguins. You don't really, when you think of New Zealand or Australia, you don't necessarily think of penguins, but they're not all that far from Antarctica, as it turns out, when you look at the map. So lots of penguins there. And then the other cool thing is the albatross birds. So I was able to go to a preserve to see albatross birds. And those are the big winged birds. They have huge wingspans and they're kind of hinged like bats. And they're super cool because they come back about 3 years after they're born to their nesting site and they go to re-nest, but they've been at sea the whole time. So when they come in, they don't have land legs. So they come into land and they fall over and tumble and stumble and they don't know how to walk. They haven't built up any muscles yet. So it was awesome just to experience something like that. You don't see in Texas or California or other places I've lived.
Yeah. That's the great thing in our industry, you know, getting a chance to travel like that. So anyway, I'd like to just say thanks, Michael, you know, for talking to me about, you know, bringing that idea of just fix it, you know, to endpoint management. And, you know, always welcome, you know, to have a chat here. I do these about every couple weeks and wish you the best. To find out more about his blog, you can find it on Medium and I point to it on my website. And also to find out more about Nitrosphere, of course, come to nitrosphere.com. You can find reference to Michael's blog, as well as find out more about our products. Join me in a couple weeks, you know, to talk with another customer, partner, or industry expert. And I appreciate your time. Thanks, Michael.
# just fix it.
All right. Great. Thanks. Cool.